Ballpark Nation presents
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here come the Astros burning.
First pitch. And Alex lines it to the left center field at the base hit. Pitcher around third and coming home. Easier up with the baseball. The throw to the plate. Not in time. Astros win. Astros win.
One every time. Go Astros. Alvarez hits a high drive center field. Veer leans back. This game is turned upside down.
And the pitch is lifted to right by Castellanos. Long run for Tucker over toward the line and foul territory. Makes the catch, and the Houston Astros do it again. 2022 World Series champions.
Welcome to Go Astros, your look at the two-time World Series champions from three guys who have been here since Art Howe had hair.
Here come the Astros breathing orange fire. Here come the Astros.
And welcome everybody back to Go Astros. We've had a couple of weeks off so we could all lick wounds and not really have to talk about the fact that the Astros were not in the ALCS or the World Series. We've got Andy, we've got Brian. Brian, I'm going to start with you. Talk a little bit about the World Series. I'm not going to be one of those guys that says, well, the Yankees got lucky because of who they drew, because who they drew is who they drew.
Yeah.
But they ran into the Dodgers and they have not looked that feckless since they ran into the Astros in 2022. What's the tone up there around Yankee fandom?
It is much more negative than a team that won its first pennant in 15 years should be. In part because, the Yankees have this, you win the World Series or the season's terrible mentality, which is, I think destructive in the end, particularly in a sport where, it's a week, right? You have a bad week during the season, right? This is the playoffs are, 7-game series. They, had a bad week. That determines so much of your negativity. This is part of why we talk about the regular season really matters, and you should celebrate the accomplishments you have because, fate may not be in your favor at all times.
Andy, your thoughts on, is Aaron Judge becoming the thing that people are like? He's the guy that can't win the big game. I mean, I'm actually rare amongst Astros fans in the sense that even though he talked about Altuve or whatever, I'm still a fan of Aaron Judge. I think he's a hell of a baseball player. I tend to fall on Brian's side of things is, I don't think it's he chokes in big time situations. I think it just sort of collides in a weird way.
It's interesting to me to see how the Yankees fan base reacts to Aaron Judge. And I've always given credit to the Yankees fan base for being a more intelligent baseball fan base. I realize they have their share of mooks and trogs and everything else.
Including those who try to steal foul balls from Mookie Betts.
Using right field.
All of that, those guys are, that's Yankee fandom. But I think there are very intelligent baseball fans who understand that what happens in the playoffs can be defining for a player, but it's not the sum be all of what a player is. Aaron Judge for the Yankees is entering, and I know the Yankee fan who watches this, Emily, is going to get really upset with this comparison, but he's entering Jeff Bagwell territory from a playoff perspective in that he's an incredible regular season performer, but teams have the ability to pitch around him, and he has the ability to get himself out in small sample sizes. And so far in his baseball career, in his playoff appearances, that's exactly what he's done. Bagwell at least got to the point towards the end that he started taking walks. I didn't see that from Judge yet. And I don't have the OPB numbers in front of me to know if he's, realizes that he's not going to get the best things to hit in the world. But it's an interesting dichotomy. Now, all of this has shifted since, the mid 80s. When we started really getting heavily into probably the 90s, when we started getting heavily into expanding the playoffs, because it used to be very rare for a team to make the playoffs that wasn't the Yankees. So you could have this place in your head where Ted Williams is the greatest hitter who ever lived, but he didn't really have a playoff body of work to talk about.
Yeah.
Now there's 16 rounds of playoffs, so everybody should have a playoff body of to work with. So you have the argument for the Astros fans that Altuve is the best Astro ever. War says that's not true yet. Probably will be at the end of everything. But Judge is entering in that same category where he might be the best regular season Yankee, or at least in the top 5 to ever, wear the uniform. But from a playoff perspective, he hasn't been that guy. And Yankees fans, the Mooks, are going to get really fickle with him really quickly. I think the deeper problem for the Yankees is their front office and their lack of willingness to address what I think most fans see as holes in their roster makeup. They had health this year. I think that was the big difference between them and the last couple of years. Giancarlo Stanton, for instance, was healthy during the playoffs. He hasn't been healthy during September and October in a really long time. That, more than anything else, more than the matchup, more than all that, got them to the World Series. Can they count on that team staying healthy again? I don't know.
Yeah. Speaking of health, we'll start with Andy on this one, but Ohtani's going to have another surgery, I guess. Like, do you think we're ever going to see Shohei Ohtani, the guy that really does play both sides of the ball, or do you think they're going to have to start training him into a different position? Because I just don't know how long he's going to be able to take a beating like that.
I mean, does it matter? He has a surgery and he wins an MVP. The Dodgers certainly needed starting pitching this year, and they certainly could have used a healthy Shohei Ohtani in the rotation. Having said that, I don't know anybody that's regretting the season that he had this year. Everything worked out the way the Dodgers wanted it to, even with some health issues on their side. But no, he's not getting younger necessarily, and his body clearly has some issues where overuse is going to cause breakdowns sooner rather than later. He might be able to dance and skate through. I mean, he's not an old man by any means yet, but and Brian, you can tell me how old he is exactly. But, the other side of 30 is looming, and in general, players don't get better at that point. So he'll be great, and he'll be great for a few more years. And the Dodgers have deferred all that money for the next 172 years or whatever, however that contract was written.
Yeah.
But I don't know that you're ever going to see the dominant pitching performance and the dominant hitting performance in the same year. But if he's a highly paid DH for the rest of his career, the Dodgers are still getting their money's worth.
Yeah. Well,
9 WAR this year and going to win the MVP despite not pitching. Anything he adds on the mound will be,
a bonus.
Yeah, we've literally never seen this. Babe Ruth was a pitcher who converted to a hitter because he, there's never been any
money was
Ohtani's done. Period. Regardless of what he does for the rest of his career.
And he has a cute puppy, which I appreciate. All right, so the Astros again, a successful season. That's the one that we really wanted to see. Now we're beginning to see the Astros prepare to do whatever moves they're going to do. They're trying to free up some spaces on the 40-man roster. The winter meetings will be coming up in about 3 weeks, if I'm measuring that, really more like a month, which is generally speaking the beginning of getting crazy season. And these days, also the end of getting crazy season, as it's often turned out. One of the things that has surprised me, and I'm always a look on the bright side of life kind of guy, is a lot of national media pundits and a lot of just people that know baseball fully expect Alex Bregman to be re-signed with the Astros. I'm talking about down to Verlander's brother to the majority of the athletic staff. Andy, do you feel like we've gone through this with Cole and Springer and Correa? Bregman to me feels like a different guy, mostly because of a lot of the stuff he's done in the clubhouse with the pitching staff. And I think we already have his salsa in the ballpark. Where are you feeling as far as optimistic on whether they get him signed? And how important is it to you, I guess?
I don't think not signing Alex Bregman means I don't get swamp sauce on my barbecue potato. I don't think that's a thing that necessarily has to happen. I don't know, because of exactly the scenario that you've painted and the financial crunch the Astros are going to be under. It won't surprise me if they sign Bregman, but I can't get my hopes up about it until it actually happens, because we haven't signed Springer. We haven't signed Cole. We didn't sign Correa. Correa was evidently pretty signable too, and we chose to go a different direction. The difference for me is that with each of those individuals, and you can include Charlie Morton and a handful of others in that, is that the Astros had ready replacements either on the major league roster or in the minor leagues. They don't have a replacement for Alex Bregman. They don't have a guy who can play third base. We saw Shea Whitcomb, and I'm not pinning it on one game against the Mariners late in the year because
4 errors in 2 innings, bro. That's
in the hangover game. I mean, nobody great. He had a really crappy game, but he wasn't the guy before that either. There was, the idea that Zach DeZenzo was going to be that guy in the minor leagues, and now the organization seems to be looking at him as a legitimate option at first base. And if you sign Bregman, you're going to have to play him at first base because that's what you're going to be able to afford to put at first base. So I'm kind of 50-50 on it. I want him to resign. I want him to be back. But until it actually happens, I'm not going to allow myself to invest a lot of emotion in it because I've seen too many times before where it just didn't work out. I think, again, the difference is this time the Astros don't have an answer in their system to fix the problem.
Yeah, and I think we need to dispel with the root. I think we need to, until it's a thing, dispel with trying to predict what Jim Crane is going to do vis-a-vis the luxury tax deadline, because there was a million people who thought the Astros would do nothing at the trade deadline because of being at the trade deadline at the tax level. To me, it's like he's proven he's willing to spend. You could look down the road and see relief to that coming off, even beginning next year, Brian. So,
yeah, I'll give you a slight counter argument to that. One is you're absolutely right. Jim Crane's the key variable here, because part of why the Astros have not signed, all these free agents we've talked about internally is they've all, most all of them have gotten free agent contracts longer than 5 years. And Crane's never given a free agent contract longer than 5 years. He's willing to spend a good bit of money, including on free agents such as Josh Hader last year, Justin Verlander, or his extension, etc. But it's the length that would have to change. And again, a market rate for Alex Bregman, most people think would be 7 years, heavily based on the Matt Chapman contract. And they're very, he's 1 year younger, but they're really comparable players. Other than that, the slight counter argument, Jim, is that most owners don't like to pay the salary tax. It's just money out of their pockets. And there are repeater penalties. So, for instance, the Rangers owner has talked about reducing the payroll so that he can duck the luxury tax this offseason. That's a real sort of common thing. So now, you're absolutely right. There's more money coming off next year. Good news, next year they will not have to. In 2026, they will not have to pay Rafael Montero and Jose Abreu not to play.
And Zach Greinke.
Bad news for 2025. You could really use that money, but hey, it's water under the bridge or money out of Jim Crane's pockets. Congratulations to the Montero and Abreu heirs. Last year, I sat here and said, I think the Astros, they're real close and they're likely to go in large part because I know 2024 is a big year for the franchise. They've been building that, and the moves they made at the trade deadline last year were to add money to the 2024 payroll. It's a bigger question this year because they could duck the luxury tax if they choose. They may have to get creative and make some moves. But obviously, one of the problems with that is you end up with a corner infield situation that is Zach DeZenzo, Shea Whitcomb, and
Mauricio Dubon full-time.
Yeah, somebody they find somewhere off the scrap heap, essentially, which, again, could work, but it's less likely to work than, certainly less likely to work than Alex Bregman.
Yeah, it's weird because 25, I'm not, I think 25 is just as wide open for the Astros as this year was. I think also, even if you get replacement level improvement at first base, it's a drastic improvement, as well as replacement level in the outfield, that you can see the team improving in the aggregate, right, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, they greatly improved just by jettisoning Jose Abreu, that's how bad he was. And John Singleton was essentially a replacement level player in large part because his defensive range really restricted the offensive gains that he made. And again, you can make a good case that, Chas McCormick has always been better than that, so he can't be that bad. So,
well, he was actually hitting better too, right? After his sort of demotion, Andy, then he broke his wrist. So.
His 48-hour demotion. Yeah. I mean, it's nice that Jake got his wife pregnant so Chaz could come back up immediately after being set down. I like how they worked that out, 9 months prior. My problem is that if the Astros did not have April last year, as we all understand, and they had just played 500 ball, they would have won the division going away and had a bye in the first round. They didn't do that. That's not what happened. So what gets better this year with the status quo? I don't think you can roll into this season with Jake Myers and Chas McCormick being a big part of your plan. I think you've got to have another bat somewhere. And if that's the development of Zach DeCenzo at first base, if that is Yiner and Victor Carantini both playing every day and letting Cesar Salazar being your second catcher, if that is signing a free agents to hopefully a left-handed bat to be in left field, something has to be different because the lineup as it was worked really well at times and then went completely dead silent at other times. And that's what we saw against Detroit. You ran into a team that was really hot, but you also didn't hit at all in two games at home. I don't think we're going to miss Kyle Tucker for nearly 4 months of the season this year. I don't think that we're going to necessarily have an April like we had because I think our pitchers are going to be better established. But there's got to be a couple of lineup moves regardless of what happens with the Bregman situation. And I think Dana Brown's going to have to get really creative about that. And I think that's part of why you're hearing the Ryan Presley rumors start to pop up. And I know I'm segueing for you, but you've got to free up money somewhere. And that's one of the places that if you can find a buyer who's willing to take on that contract and that performance, you've got to kind of do it because that's really the only way you're going to avoid a really steep penalty with the luxury tax.
Yeah, and I want to get to Brian on that because it was his most recent last two Substacks were dealing with that. But again, for the record, I'm going to take Jim Crane at his word that the window doesn't close while he's here and that he has demonstrated to do things that the Astros fans flat out said he wouldn't do, and he's done them. Brian, the trading for trying to trade Ryan Presley, you've talked about the difficulty of that, biggest being he has a no trade clause. So, and I don't know if it's a full no trade clause or what.
May I be pedantic for a second?
Sure.
He is a 10-5 man, which is to say that he has 10 years of service time and his last 5 years have been with one team. And so all major league players, regardless of what their contract says, due to union negotiations, in fact, this is the only thing the union got in like 1952 for the players. They have no trade rights. So this is me being annoyed with Chandler Rome for constantly writing his no trade clause rather than, being more pro-union. Go Unions.
No, that's also
Kurt Flood would be very proud of you for getting that correct.
Yeah, yes, he will. But he can decide where to go. His numbers have decreased.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, what do you think they could get for Ryan Presley, and how much would that free them up financially? Because it is coming from a place of wealth for the team.
Yeah, and the other thing to note is that there's a large number of good relievers on the market as free agents, which I talked about in Substack. And actually, there's two other closers who are likely to be traded this offseason in Devin Williams and Ryan Helsley. So, they got to find the right team. And then, part of what the 10-5, the no trade rights that Presley has means that he may not want to get traded somewhere to be the setup man. So someone I think the Astros ought to be interested in is Brett Beatty, who is a Mets prospect who failed but could play third base in a platoon, and maybe he just needs a change of scenery and a different kind of place. So Presley for Beatty would be, Mets may not have much use for him. They may like Presley better, but does Presley want to be Edwin Diaz's setup man? And again, human factors matter here. Presley has, I think, 2 young children under the age of 5. Does he want to uproot them and move them for a year, particularly because he's probably going to sign a bunch of 1-year contracts coming up? Again, I will respect his decision if he says, no, would rather keep them here, and I'd rather sort of keep them here. So again, all this had to be factored in. So what can they get? Well, there's not a good market for them. They're limited on where they can trade them. They're not getting much for Ryan Presley, but what they would get out of it is more salary flexibility to sign one of these offensive players that Andy's been talking about. Someone in the corner outfield or first base or third base, and sort of rejigger their money there. The Astros have, going back to the Ken Giles trade, have put a lot of resources, both money and prospects, into their bullpen, signing free agents, guys like Joe Smith and Hector Neris, rather than just kind of, throw a bunch of stuff on the wall and see if Taylor Scott, see if we get a Taylor Scott out of it, which is what they started doing this last year. Part of why they've been able to do that is because they haven't had huge needs in the lineup to spend money on that and commit more resources in the bullpen. So as the lineup, as they're not sort of producing as many players out of the minor league system to just take, hey, just be Jeremy Pena and go take the shortstop job when we have this immediate transition. We may have to go sign somebody. It's going to change how they spend their resources, less in the bullpen and more in the lineup.
And do you want to follow up on that? I mean, to me, when I read it, I kind of immediately agreed with both of Brian's writings about it. It just doesn't seem to make any degree of sense, mostly because why would Presley want to leave and who would take him?
Why Presley would want to leave is if you went to a team that clearly needed a closer and was willing to spend the money. I mean, you have those conversations before Presley agrees to waive his 10-5 rights. Basically, let's say the Yankees wanted him. He'd have a conversation with Brian Cashman and say, Brian, how am I going to be used? Brian says, hey, you're going to be my closer. This is why we would be willing to spend this money. And that's a reason Presley would agree to that. As far as what we get back in return, I don't know that it matters as much. It's not about, as Brian alluded to, I don't think it's as much about what's coming back as it is the payroll flexibility it would provide you, because that matters. That matters from avoiding a tax. That matters from staying at a certain level of tax if you're going to pay one. That would be the victory of trading really anybody at this point from that bullpen, because I don't know that outside of Brian Abreu that there's anybody who has a great market. And even Abreu had kind of a regression year, at least anecdotally. I'm sure his numbers looked fine in the aggregate, but didn't feel as confident with him this year as we did years past. But he has longer runway. He's still got some free agency or some arbitration years in front of him. So that's probably the better deal. But that's the same reason the Astros would want to hold on to him over Presley.
Yeah, it's definitely just one of those. It's fascinating to watch how they're going to try to manipulate it, because again, it's not something we've really had to see in this run of Astros baseball, and then previous owners just wouldn't have tried. So it's very fascinating to watch. Watching Dana Brown's also fascinating, and he's definitely, in many ways, he is what we had been asking for on this show forever. Just a little bit of transparency, just a little bit of a peek behind the curtain on what the plan is. Now, there's some that have argued that he's maybe too optimistic, that he's too looking on the bright side of life. I don't feel like he's misleading people when he talks. I think whenever he's talking about stuff happening, he really thinks it's what's going to happen. And, the idea that he's talking about not even planning on a team without Alex Bregman, for example, matches up with Jose Altuve. Overall, though, what have you thought about his sort of outward-facing role as the GM, Andy, as far as just how he presents himself in the team, particularly countered to, say, Lunau and Click?
He's certainly different than the two gentlemen who had the position before him, from both the speech pattern and how he presents himself. I don't get the idea that he's necessarily trying to sell me something until he starts talking about the back of the baseball card. And if he never says that little phrase again, I'll be pretty happy with him.
Yeah.
That kind of still sticks in my craw from this past season. I think he's as straight a shooter as you can be in that role, because you are the face of the front office, for lack of a better term. So you do have to be somewhat upbeat and optimistic, especially when you have a team that spent a lot of money and expects to win. I don't think reflecting the fans' feelings, I don't think it would have done anybody any good for Dana Brown to be a fan of the Astros in April and say, boy, this team sucks and we've got to blow it up, which I think is what fans want to have happen. I think they want to see a GM that is as reactionary and over the top as they are. I'm glad we don't have that guy. I'm glad Dana Brown is not that guy. I don't think anybody in the Astros front office is necessarily that guy. And yeah, there were hard conversations that happened about what is going on. You don't get to the point of deciding that I'm going to pay Jose Abreu not to be here anymore without really hard conversations going on. But I think from a player perspective, he's a guy from a front office that protects his players. He pumps up his players within reason. He is realistic without being negative. So that public facing part of him, I think, is a good fit for Crane, who does like to swoop in and take the headlines. He's kind of the steady guy, straight man, if you will.
Yeah, Brian, what are your thoughts? I mean, your thoughts on that? And I don't think, like, I think a lot of people have said that, have almost accused Brown of outright lying to fans instead of recognizing that it's a volatile industry, that things literally can change by the minute. I do believe that what he's saying at the time is what he thinks is going to happen.
Yeah. And I think of less of that he's trying to sell me something than that's just kind of his disposition in life. I think if you told him about a new job you were going to get, or this girl you met, or, sort of anything, he'd have a very sort of optimistic take on that, and a more optimistic take than Jeff Lunau or James Click would. I think that's just everything I come across is that's just sort of him and how he sort of approaches things and thinks about things. So I don't think he's trying to like sell me. I don't think he's trying to like pump me up as an Astros fan that this thing's going to happen. I think that's his sort of attitude. My attitude is like, hey, they're a good team with lots of good players. I know they weren't as bad as 7-19. I knew they'd improve on that. The question is how much. Thank goodness they improved as much as they did. Won the division. Will they, re-sign Alex Bregman? I don't know. And his real answer is, I don't know. I think they're kind of working on it at some level, right? They have some number that they could make it work at. But, he's not going to, say that until it happens. The other thing to note about Major League general managers is it's not their job to be totally honest, because that is not in the interest of us as Astros fans. Saying, oh God, we can't afford Ryan Presley. We got to trade him to, whoever will give us a bag of baseballs. We'll only get you a bag of baseballs. Okay. It's interesting that it's leaked out, but it's not surprising, but it's not surprising at some level, right? That there's a caginess to this job, and we have to expect that. And of course, his audience isn't just us as fans and our emotions. It's also, a bunch of guys in the clubhouse, right, are listening to what Dana Brown says, and if he tells them they suck.
Yeah.
And he's also probably not the best motivational strategy unless they're going to start going, Major League and ripping off his clothes for every win.
Yeah, well, he's also his audience is also other teams he's negotiating with, right?
Yeah, he's got 29 peers that he's talking to. So you don't talk about how bad Jake Myers is at hitting the ball. You talk about how great Jake Myers is defensively, and he's going to be my starting center fielder unless. There's certainly a certain amount of horse trading that's going on in every conversation that any GM has. Some of them are better than others. I think the thing that Dana Brown has in his back pocket right now is that at 7-19, he said the team was going to get better, and they did. That he wasn't wrong. He helped with that, but he believed that in the team that he assembled, they eventually proved that he was right. Even if there wasn't a deep playoff run, winning the division, as we've talked about, is still the mark of a successful season, because it is who was better over 162 games or 161 in the Astros case.
And he didn't just say it, right? He made lots of moves to not only trade for Yusei Kikuchi, which, hey, the optimistic part of that worked out, right? But also to get guys like Ben Gamble and Jason Hayward and Caleb Ord, a bunch of guys who helped this team, who were really sort of small moves, but the ability to win those small moves provided benefits, including, I think Caleb Ord's going to be a key guy in the bullpen in 2025.
And I would add Carantini to that. I mean, he made a number of moves that were what I think most Astros fans would consider under the radar. I don't think a lot of Astros fans care who the backup catcher is until he doesn't do something you want him to do, and then all of a or if it's Yainer Diaz as the backup and why isn't he playing? That's when we care.
Yeah.
But I think Brown is a good fit for the Astros in what they are right now. I think the fear that he was going to ignore analytics was a little bit overblown because I haven't seen proof that that's been a thing yet. I think the fact that we're still generating pitchers and taking pitchers off other teams' scrap heaps and making them successful members of our franchise is proof that there is still a lot of the math going in, the science going into developing players.
But also the teaching. Like, it's not just, you identify this stuff. You're right. They made improvements with guys like Taylor Scott and Caleb Orth that really mattered. And again, that's part of that is like the Astros have really good pitching coaches. And that's a big deal, and front office helps with that. But part of it is, hey, let's not get Josh Billish poached by other teams. Let's, keep him here.
Yeah. And Dana Brown has a piece of that too, because those guys get contracts every year.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, that's going to wrap us up for today. We're going to be back next week, and then we'll take the week off for Thanksgiving. Then we'll do a couple of episodes before Christmas. But definitely next week, we still got a lot more to talk about. Maybe we'll see some moves. I don't know that we're going to see an Alex Bregman signing between now and Tuesday. But for Brian, for Andy, I'm Jim Christopher, and Go Astros.